lighting environments with emissive materials inside of Unreal Engine 4. What is it? Why would you use it? And how do you do it? What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Polygon Academy. My name is Tim, and this environment you're seeing on the screen in front of you right now actually only has one spotlight for the entire scene. The rest is completely driven by the emissive lights, injecting all that color and bounce light into the environment. So today we're going to be going over exactly how I set this up step by step. It's extremely quick and easy. I guarantee you that anybody can do it. It's like a really basic thing that you can do inside of Unreal, but it has really powerful results. It's a great way to inject a lot of saturation and color into your scenes, especially if you're doing something that's like, say, sci-fi or cyberpunk with a lot of neon scenes, nighttime scenes, stuff like that. It's a really great way to just make everything feel super cohesive and actually make it feel like the emissive lights in your environment are actually interacting with all of the geometry. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to smash that like button. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm and help this channel grow, which means more content for everyone else to enjoy. So let's hop over to the computer and get started on the tutorial. All right, so here we are inside of Unreal. It's just a really basic scene that I'll give you a tour of the entire environment in about 2 seconds. But basically, it was just something I was creating for Blocktober, and I decided, hey, this would actually make a great environment for showing off emissive lighting inside of Unreal. So I just threw on some super simple tiling concrete material, grabbed some pipes from the Unreal Engine starter content, and quickly whipped this together. And I'll actually make this scene freely available to download on my gumroad. I'll just make it free, or you can pay whatever you want for it. If you feel like donating to the channel or whatever, that's awesome. If not, just grab it for free, and that way you can open it up, follow along for yourself, relight it, do whatever you want with the entire scene. Like I said, it's super basic. It's definitely not constructed in a way that I would consider like proper for game art. It's just a bunch of literally cubes smashed together really quickly to make a really rough block out. And if I was to take this to a further, completed game environment, I would definitely go in and add more detail and, clean up the models and stuff like that. But for a lighting study or a smashed together block out, totally fine. So you can see, yeah, basically I just added one little spotlight here so the character casts a shadow when you're near this intense light source. Because emissive lighting actually doesn't cast shadows. It's all baked to the light maps and the volumetric light map. And you might be wondering, well, why wouldn't you just use either static lights or dynamic lights instead of using the emissive for lighting? And you might say, oh, well, isn't baked lighting on its way out because of RTX and stuff like that? And definitely not. A lot of studios still use baked lighting for their current games. I'm sure it'll be used in next-gen games, and we'll go into that a little bit later on of why you would actually want to use this. But let's continue running around. So I just did like a very two-color environment. And all of this is emissive lighting, completely baked. And you can actually see, I've enabled capsule shadows on the character. So if you look on the wall behind him, he does cast a very soft shadow, and that's based off of the volumetric light map and the capsule shadows, which is a cool little thing you can do. If you guys want, I'll link in the description below to a tutorial that I followed to do it, and then maybe I'll make one on setting it up later in the future. But there's a great little 2-minute tutorial that will show you how to do this really super simply. And this is a really cool technique for creating that like ambient soft shadow, especially in a lighting situation like this. If you look down near his feet, there's a bit of a cast soft shadow there. That's kind of like the shadowing you would get when there's a huge, massive, soft light source anyways. And you see this in games like The Last of Us and stuff. When a character's up against a wall, they have this soft shadow, and that's probably done by capsule shadows. But yeah, all of this lighting is based off of the emissive, and then just one spotlight down at the end of the hall here for this harsher cast shadow. But as you can see, because of the emissive lighting impacts the volumetric light map, which the character is sampling at all times as you move through the environment, it actually blends extremely well with the static lighting. And it's definitely totally viable for a production, especially if you want to keep your rendering costs lower and you are using light maps for your game. It's a great way to quickly fill your environment with color and GI and get a really nice soft lighting. So like I said, this type of lighting, while it's super basic, it's super useful. Like this scene isn't using any RTX features, anything like that, because even nowadays, ray tracing is still super expensive, and I don't think you're really going to see it start being used heavily until like well into the next generation of consoles. There's definitely PC games out there that are embracing it and using it already, but at most games are developed for console first these days. So this is a great way of creating some super cheap lighting and keep your frame rate really, really high if you're building your own game or your levels using Unreal. So how do we do it? It's actually super simple and really, really easy to use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually kill all of the lighting in the scene and start from scratch, and you'll see just how quick and easy this is. So if I go to my world settings here and go force no pre-computed lighting, that's going to basically, when I hit build, it's going to terminate all of the light maps in the scene. And so you can see literally this is the effect of the spotlight that I have placed. If I just toggle that, that's all that spotlight is really doing. So if I turn that off, you can see the scene is pretty much completely dark now. I'm going to go into unlit mode here. So we just terminated our light map results just because I wanted you guys to see this come together from scratch. So I'm going to untoggle that now. So you can see, yeah, I've turned off this spotlight. I'll just leave it there, but I'm going to turn it off for now. And what the first thing you need to do is create an emissive material. I like to use a material instance of a master material that I can quickly, duplicate, change the color, change the intensity. That way you don't have to save your material every time you change it, or duplicate a bunch of materials, makes changes that take really long time to save. What I'm going to go is I'm going to go to my emissive lighting tutorial, materials, and I'm just going to recreate my master material. So in the content browser, I'm just going to go to create a new material. And so you can see here it's a new material. I'm just going to call this something like emissive master material. Boom. Open it up. And it's going to be extremely fast and easy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold 3 for a 3 vector. So this is basically a color picker, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this to a parameter, because a parameter is something that shows up in your material instances and allows you to change the values of the instance on the fly, which is really cool. And then I'm going to give it a name here of emissive color. And I'm just going to set it to like something like just some form of color. We can change it later on. And then what I'm going to do, instead of just plugging this right into my emissive, I'm going to add a multiply node, and by holding M and clicking. And then if you hold 1 and click, it gives you a constant. I'm going to convert this to a parameter as well, and this is going to control our intensity of our emissive. So right click, convert to parameter. I'm going to call this one emissive intensity. And I'm going to give this a default value. Where is it? Default value of 2. I usually go between 2 and 3 for most of my emissive values, because if you go to 1, it's going to be emissive and show up in the darkness, but it's not going to start really glowing and blooming. And I'll show you how to set up all your post-process settings so just your emissives are glowing and you don't get that Vaseline effect later on in the tutorial. So what I'm going to do is plug this into B, the color into A, and smash that into emissive color. And you can see it looks like it's glowing already. If you crank the value, it's probably not a really good thing. What we're going to do is we're going to boost it on the meshes themselves, not through the shader. So we're just going to hit save on that. So now we have our emissive master material. You can see these are just the old ones I already have going on in the scene, but this is the one we just created. Now if you right click and go create material instance, I'm going to go to cyan emissive. Cyan emissive material, and if I go back to my master, I'm going to go create another material instance, call this yellow emissive material. And if I open up the yellow one, so you can see our 2 parameters here. If I click on emissive color, I can just quickly change this, and what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to apply this to something in the world. So this is the yellow emissive. If I go to the details and overwrite that. So now if I see that one of the benefits of using a material instance is when I change this value, it'll update in real time in the world. So let's say I wanted it like super red and pink. You don't have to save your material and see it recompile every time and then update in the world. You can just choose whatever you want. So we could go for like, that nice deep saturated orange or something like that. Just hit save. Emissive value, if I can start to crank that up. But I'm gonna leave it at 2 for this case, for both the cyan and the yellow. So yeah, you can basically just duplicate your master material an infinite number of times, make as many different colors as you want to quickly apply to meshes. And that way you can quickly test out different color schemes for your scene, and it's super fast and efficient rather than having to make a bunch of lights and then say you want to change all the colors, having to select all those lights, change all the colors, update the emissive color of the lighting strip that's behind it. It's just a bit of a pain in the ass. Especially if you don't need those lights to be casting real-time shadows, which is still really expensive. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to give this, it's the cyan again, the Unreal. But all this is just some geometry. Usually also while I'm working in a scene, because obviously you can't see anything, I'll just create a point light just for while I work so I can actually see the environment. It doesn't look super amazing, but I'm just going to turn off the, increase the brightness, increase the whatever, just so I can actually see my environment while I'm working. But all of these strip lights are just geometry. In fact, it's actually this pillar. What I did is I just duplicated the pillar and slapped on the emissive material and then just scaled it. For using emissive materials, unless you're using like a texture to simulate maybe like neons or like some type of gradient inside the light, or like the light fixture cover itself, you don't really need UVs. So you can just grab even a basic, cube from here and slap an emissive material on it, and you're pretty good to go. So I'll delete this because I'm just gonna show you exactly how I redid this scene, or redid this section right here. So I just basically, created a little thin strip, rotated it, and put it into place because I wanted that cool kind of like strip lighting. So using emissive for this is really good because you'll get a nice even light fall off from it. Whereas if you were to use a spotlight to try and simulate that, you're going to get this weird cone shape, and it's not going to look like an actual one of those like diffused light strips that you see in a lot of modern architectural rendering and stuff like that. So I'm just going to pop this into place. Where was it? Up here. And maybe I'll just actually duplicate this light so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to delete these scene lights after I've done my very first initial bake anyways, because that's going to quickly fill the scene with GI, and then it'll make working a lot easier. So you can see literally the same mesh, just applied the glowing teal material to it. Same thing over here. It's just one of these strips. So yeah, you can just duplicate a mesh in your scene, or create a really cool light fixture shape in a really basic model, slap an emissive material on it, and have that light your scene. But what you need to do next to actually have it impact the scene, because right now, if I was to bake, it actually wouldn't do anything. You select your mesh, and in the details, if you just search for emissive, under the light mask settings, it might be collapsed. You just it says use emissive for static lighting. So this will tell it to actually emit photons from the emissive surface, and those will bounce around your scene and give you some really nice GI. So I'm going to turn that on, and then you see here emissive boost. Basically, we set our value of our emissive material to 2, and instead of having to crank up, say we do a bake and the scene is really dim, some people would go in and crank up the actual intensity multiplier of their emissive material, which isn't good because it'll really start to blow out, and it's going to be really hard to control your overall bloom and stuff like that. So what in here you can do is the emissive boost. This tells it on this mesh specifically when it's baking, multiply the power of the emissive. And this is a little bit finicky sometimes because it's actually based on the size of your mesh. So for a thin strip of lighting like this, I set it something like 8. But for a larger surface like this, because this entire surface is going to be emitting photons, I set my emissive boost to something like 3.5 because I didn't want it to really blow out the scene. So it's going to take a little bit of tweaking, but it's really, really quick and easy. So you can see this panel here is set to something like 5, but it's just literally a cube that I smashed back behind here. And that's pretty much it. These light panels up on the ceiling, exactly the same thing, a cube that I just smashed up there. I didn't want too much light coming down from the ceiling, so I left those emissive boost at 1. And all this yellow stuff, 2 for these strips, because I wanted this hallway to be a bit more dimly lit. And this big light source at the end of the hallway, just because I wanted it, when you look up the stairs, to have like light glowing around the corner. It's set to 8. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to delete these lights. And so we're back to pretty much nothing. We have some reflection captures pasted in the scene, so you're seeing some of the screen space reflections on the puddles. This is actually the ground floor from the reflections demo. I just grabbed that material and slapped it on there that Epic put out. And you can vertex blend it and change up the location of the puddles and all that stuff. But now what I'm going to do is go to the world settings here. Right now, I have this all set up for my final bake that I did because I wanted to show you guys at the scene at like the final quality. But anytime I'm doing my first pass on all this emissive lighting, I don't want it to take forever to bake, and that's really easy to lose a lot of time. And what a lot of people will do is they'll sit there, they'll trigger a bake, they'll wait like half an hour for it to go through and bake at super high quality, and then they'll be like, oh, there's a little error there, or oh, I want this light to be 10% brighter, and then they'll trigger another half-hour bake, and it's just a huge waste of time. So what I'm going to do is set my static lighting scale to 1, so it's not going to be insanely accurate. I'm going to set, because 1 is the default, and the smaller you make that number, the more accurate your results will be, but your bake times go up. I covered that in my lighting presets video, and I'll link down to that below as well. It goes really in depth into all these settings. My indirect lighting quality, I'll set it to like 1.5 because I want to see just a very quick look of how the indirect is going to bounce around the scene. And I'm just going to build this probably at medium quality. On my PC, it literally takes like half a minute. So I'm just going to hit build. So just remember, all of the meshes you want to use to actually emit light in your scene, you have to toggle on the use emissive for static lighting, because maybe some of the meshes you just want to be there to actually look like emissive, neons and stuff, but you actually don't want them to contribute to your overall scene. So you can kind of pick and choose where you want your light coming from, and then just kind of fill in the gaps with faked emissive sources here and there. And that way you have a lot of fine control over the intensity of the overall amount of light being injected into your scene. Boom. So there we go. This is, like I said, a medium quality bake with very, low quality settings, and you can already get a quick look at exactly how the emissive is interacting with the geometry, bouncing around the scene. It's actually interacting with the volumetric fog that I have added to the scene. And if I show the volumetric light map, where is it? Visualize, volumetric light map. Here you can see all the probes that are getting lighting information from all the emissive in the scene, where it's hitting the ground, bouncing up, and that's basically these probes are what any movable object in the scene will sample. So even though the overall lighting is static and baked, it still blends really well with movable objects or dynamic objects. So characters, movable props. So you had like a barrel that you want to be able to explode or throw around and stuff like that. Those objects will sample these little spheres that basically, capture the GI from 360 degrees, and it really blends nicely with a baked lighting environment. So that's why not every light in your scene has to be dynamic, and Unreal actually works best with a baked lighting workflow, I find. Some different engines don't bake light maps, but still bake all the GI to probes like this. So even if you're working with a different engine, chances are you will still be baking the GI in most cases in some way or shape or form, just because calculating real-time GI is still extremely expensive, even on RTX hardware, let alone consoles and stuff like that. So this is the final result of just the emissive, because this spotlight at the end of the hallway is still disabled. So you can see there is still some directionality just because of the amount of emissive down here at the end of the hall. And if I run around real quick, you can see it's pretty similar results to what we had before. You have that soft shadow from the character still based on those capsule shadows, but not a harsh cast shadow. And same for up here. So, and yeah, I have like these little abstract light sources up in the ceiling here to get that kind of surrealist soft glow coming from above. But that's literally all of the lighting in my scene. So you can hopefully see just how quick and easy this is to really color your scene, add some really nice GI and soft lighting. Like I said, it works really well for like strip lighting like this. You can see the fall off from the light. I'm just gonna hide the volumetric light map for now. That nice soft fall off, because a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll add like a neon or a halogen, and then they'll add like a spotlight. And then they'll open it super wide, increase the intensity. And that's great, like if you want your character to, walk near this wall and cast a really long shadow or something like that. But it doesn't look super accurate still, right? Like you get this weird cone shape, even if you crank open the width of your of your spotlight. I mean, maybe that's the look you want, maybe it isn't, but I find for like any type of strip lighting like this, it's better to just let the emissive do most of the heavy lifting. And like I said, it does actually impact the volumetric fog since the last couple updates of Unreal Engine. So if I go into my world outliner, grab my fog, I have volumetric fog turned on, and I've just adjusted some of the settings. But down here you can see there's a setting called static lighting volumetric fog static lighting scattering intensity. That's a mouthful. And I've cranked it down a bit because it's initially at 1, and you can see it starts to wash everything out. But it is like the light is bouncing around inside of the volumetric fog a lot more at the end of the hallway here because there's more light. So it's pretty cool. Like the fact that even though there's no real light at the moment impacting the volumetric fog and casting like, you know, a harsh volumetric shadow, you still get some of that nice soft glow inside of your fog. So say this could be really useful if you're, say, maybe doing like a cyberpunk city where there's emissive everywhere. You're not going to go through every single emissive sign and place, you know, a million little lights, especially if you have to update any of the colors. Maybe the art director's like, okay, I want all the signs in this district to be orange. If you're using prefabs, yes, you could do that. You could have the emissive and a light inside of a prefab that you just update. Because sometimes, yeah, like I said, you would want maybe more dynamic cast shadows and also have the emissive at the same time fill in the GI for that light. So you can combine the two into a workflow that's really, you know, you're using stationary lights to have any lights that would impact your characters or things that you want to be casting shadows, and then have most of your GI built around maybe your skylight and emissive lighting and stuff like that. Especially for nighttime scenes, is really, really useful. But like I said, I want that a bit of a harsh cast shadow when you go to the end of the hall and have that cool, you know, long shadow from the character. So I'm just going to grab this spotlight that I added. You can see it's, you know, it's nothing too crazy. It's just a spotlight there. I increased the source radius to be roughly the same size as this light source. So if I turn it on, effects world. And what I also did is on the soft source radius, because I don't want this random weird spotlight showing up in all my reflections, I blew out the soft source radius so it's really like soft and evened out, because by default it looks like this and you get this weird orb appearing in your reflections because the lights in Unreal actually show up in your reflections, right? So the source radius, see if I adjust it, and the larger your source radius, the softer your baked shadows are going to be too. You know, a small light source creates really sharp shadows usually, and then a larger soft light source will create really diffused shadows when you bake. But in this case, I don't want it showing up. I want to see that cool Unreal logo in my puddles. So what I do is I take my soft source radius and just crank it way up until it's pretty like much disappeared. Now that I've turned that on, when I get close to this light, yeah, you do have a dynamic shadow for the character. So this is a great way if you have a really limited budget, maybe on mobile. For VR, this is another thing that would be great because you can really light your environments with a lot of baked lighting and then have very few actual dynamic or stationary lights, because for VR, you want to keep your rendering costs as low as possible and keep your frame rate as high as possible, because it has to render it twice, right? One for each eye of the goggle. So that's definitely a situation where you would probably still be using baked lighting for the near future. And this is just a great way to get really cool looking sci-fi environments or whatever. Like I said, something cyberpunk or something, you know, with a lot of emissive signs that are going to show up in your reflections, they're going to show up in your GI, and it's just going to feel really cohesive in terms of how the light is interacting in the environment. What I'm going to do is go into my world outliner, select my post-process volume. All right, but now it's the setting that we should really be talking about, and that's the bloom. So you can see here in my scene, I have the intensity set to like the standard bloom. It's about 4.11 in terms of intensity. If I crank that, yeah, you start to get this really glowy Star Warsy effect, depending on how you want your scene to look. Maybe on something that's like super sci-fi or cyberpunk, you would actually crank this value a lot more. I wanted to keep it fairly subtle, so I kept it around like, I don't know, 4.5. But the main thing that I changed is to avoid that Vaseline effect is the threshold. And if I reset this to its default value, which is -1, you can see everything really starts to bloom out. Even the highlights of, you know, on this pillar here, the bloom is just impacting the entire image. And that's not something we want, because what I want to do is have any surface, right now it's saying basically anything that's within a value of -1 and above is going to be impacting the bloom. But you remember that we set our brightness or intensity of our emissive to 2. So if I set this to 2, that'll isolate the bloom just to the emissive, and then it's going to start blooming that. But what I did is I set this to 0.45, and that way you can really control just how much glow is coming off of your emissive. So if I set this to 0, I think, yeah, there'll be more bloom, but it's still starting to bloom on, you know, these pillars and stuff like that. So I just raise the threshold up a bit, and that way anything that's like quite bright in the scene will be the only thing having bloom coming off of it. But it's all totally like your own artistic direction. If you want that super bloomy, glowy look, just play around with your threshold and intensity, and that's how you can really fine-tune what's glowing in your scene and what's not. So for me, I really like using this workflow. It gives a really like nice, soft bounce light to an area. Like again, at the end of the hallway, you get this like really nice, soft light glow coming around the corner and stuff like that. So you could actually even use this to simulate for say like some ArchViz, like architectural rendering. If I put like a more sun-colored light up above here and made it really, really powerful, I could actually simulate a really soft, you know, overcast day of light coming through the ceiling or something like that too. You would probably actually just use a skylight for that, but say for some reason you couldn't use a skylight, this would be another way of getting around that technical problem. Because at the end of the day, that's all game development usually is solving problems. So there are situations where, yeah, maybe you can use emissive lighting, maybe you have to use dynamic lighting, but it really is like this recipe book that you can pull from and find the best solution for different situations and your technical limitations within game development. And you can see we're pretty much back to where we started at the start of this video. The character is getting nicely lit from all the emissive lights and has those soft shadows against the wall and stuff like that from the capsule shadows. So pretty simple, pretty quick and easy. Hopefully maybe for your next project, you can use emissive lighting to actually inject some color and bounce light into your scene and get some really nice like soft shadows filling out your environments. So it's definitely a technique that's worth trying out. I would highly recommend it. If you want to download this scene file, I will include the link in the description below. The one thing I won't be able to actually include in it though is all these like drip decals and stuff like that, just because they are from a marketplace asset pack that I got from somebody else. So I don't want to be giving away their work for free. So I'll probably just kill most of the decals in the scene that are not from the Unreal Starter content. And but the rest of it, you'll totally be able to play around with it, create your own results, and quickly and hopefully efficiently see how this process of using emissive materials to light your scenes works. All right, so there we go. A short but sweet little tutorial. Like I said, very, very simple and easy to use, but a lot of people don't actually know about that or forget to use it. But for me, I find it's a really great way to get a really cohesive look to your environments, especially for sci-fi and cyberpunk or nighttime scenes where you want all that nice neons and colors bouncing around your environment. It'll just add so much more richness and depth to your scenes. If you want to grab that scene, just check out the link in the description below. Like I said, I'm going to put it up for free or the pay whatever you want method on Gumroad. So if you want to toss a little tip that's going to support the channel, that's totally cool. But I know a lot of you guys are on a budget, so definitely don't feel obligated. I hope it helps a lot of you understand the process and you can get some really cool results by playing around with that scene inside of Unreal for yourself. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, feel free to do so. I got plenty of more tutorial content coming out in the future. One on textile density, that was a heavily requested subject in the past, as well as one on building modular environments inside of Unreal and avoiding those pesky light map schemes, because I know a lot of people have been sending me messages on how to avoid that. As always, thank you for watching. See you in the next video.